My name is Lauren, and I am 31 years old. 5 years ago, I stood in the back of a beautiful chapel in a white dress, staring at the empty front row where my parents were supposed to be sitting. They did not show up. Instead, they were sipping champagne on a rented yacht to celebrate my younger sister getting engaged to a hedge fund manager. My mother texted me that morning saying they could not support my mistake. She said my fiancé was just a mechanic and that I was embarrassing the family. They thought my husband Harrison was a blue-collar grease monkey because he liked working under the hood of cars. What they did not know was that Harrison did not just fix cars. He owned a chain of automotive manufacturing plants across the Midwest. Before I tell you what happened 5 years later, when my poor husband bought out my father's prestigious investment bank, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are right now. Now let me take you back to the brutal dinner that shattered my family and set the stage for the ultimate reality check. Growing up in a wealthy Connecticut suburb, my parents, William and Patricia, measured human worth strictly by job titles and zip codes. My father was a senior vice president at Vanguard Trust, a regional investment bank, and my mother was a socialite who treated her daughters like show ponies. My younger sister Brittany played the game perfectly. She dated wealthy men with trust funds and impeccable pedigrees. I chose a different path. I worked as a corporate auditor and fell in love with a man who built things with his own two hands. Harrison wore denim. He had calluses on his palms. He drove a vintage truck that he restored himself. To my parents, he was a liability to their country club image. They did not care that he treated me with profound respect or that he possessed a brilliant mind. They only saw the grease under his fingernails. The tension reached its breaking point on a brisk October evening. I brought Harrison to Sunday dinner at my parents' sprawling estate to announce our engagement. The dining room was an intimidating display of wealth. Crystal chandeliers, imported porcelain, and stiff, silent service. My father sat at the head of the mahogany table, swirling an expensive glass of Bordeaux. When Harrison placed his hand over mine and told them he had asked me to marry him, the room went ice cold. My sister Brittany let out a sharp, condescending laugh. My mother set her silver fork down, staring at the modest diamond ring on my finger with unfiltered disdain. My father did not offer a congratulation. He looked Harrison up and down, taking in his unpolished boots and simple button-down shirt, and asked exactly how a mechanic planned to provide the lifestyle his daughter required. Harrison smiled politely, holding his composure, and answered that he did well for himself in the automotive industry. My mother scoffed, declaring that love would not pay the mortgage. "Love will not pay the mortgage, Lauren," my mother said, her voice slicing through the heavy silence of the dining room. She set her silver fork down on the imported porcelain plate, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the modest, elegant diamond ring on my finger. Her reaction was not born out of genuine maternal concern for my well-being. It was a calculated assessment of a bad investment. My parents lived in a world constructed entirely of appearances and leverage. Their sprawling Connecticut estate with its manicured hedges and circular driveway was a monument to their perceived superiority. My father, William, had spent 30 years climbing the corporate ladder to become a senior vice president at Vanguard Trust. He navigated his daily life through the strict lens of asset management, and he viewed his daughters as his most valuable social currency. My sister Brittany understood this assignment from a very young age. She sat across from me at the mahogany table, swirling a glass of expensive Bordeaux, radiating the smug satisfaction of a daughter who had just secured a high-yield return. Brittany was engaged to Trent, a junior hedge fund manager with a pedigree that made my father beam with unfiltered pride. Trent wore tailored Italian suits, spoke exclusively in market projections, and possessed the kind of arrogant charm that masked a severe lack of actual character. They were the golden couple, the exact image my parents wanted to project to their exclusive country club circle. Then there was Harrison. He sat beside me, a grounded, unshakable force of nature in a room full of manufactured personalities. His broad shoulders stretched the fabric of his simple button-down shirt. He did not boast about his stock portfolio or drop the names of elite golf courses. He possessed a quiet, stoic confidence that my parents immediately interpreted as ignorance. They thought his silence was the byproduct of a blue-collar education. They did not understand that a man who builds vast empires from the ground up does not feel the need to broadcast his wealth to a table full of debt-ridden socialites. My father placed his wineglass onto the table with a sharp, deliberate click. He leaned forward, resting his forearms against the polished wood, adopting the predatory posture he used to intimidate junior analysts at his investment bank. "Let us be pragmatic, Harrison," my father began, his tone dripping with patronizing condescension. Lauren was raised with a very specific standard of living. She attended elite private academies. She expects a certain caliber of stability. A mechanic shop might cover the weekly grocery bills, but it will not secure her future in this tier of society. What happens when your body gives out from the manual labor? Who absorbs the financial burden then? Harrison did not flinch. He did not raise his voice or attempt to defend his honor against the insult. He reached over and took my hand, his rough, calloused thumb brushing gently against my knuckles. It was a gesture of solidarity that anchored me in the storm of their judgment. "I appreciate your concern, William," Harrison said. His voice was a low, steady rumble that filled the dining room, devoid of any intimidation. "But you do not need to worry about Lauren experiencing any financial instability. The automotive industry has been very good to me. I own my properties outright, and I have built a foundation that will ensure she never has to worry about a single burden for the rest of her life." My mother let out a sharp, breathless laugh, as if Harrison had just told a deeply offensive joke. She looked at me, her eyes hardening into cold, calculating slits. "Owning a garage in the suburbs is not building a foundation, Lauren," Patricia said, waving her hand dismissively. "It is a hobby for people who cannot navigate a corporate boardroom. You are an intelligent woman. You are a corporate auditor. You understand numbers. You cannot possibly believe that fixing transmissions will provide the life you were meant to lead. You are embarrassing the family by even entertaining this fantasy." I looked at the people who had raised me, taking in the genuine disgust etched into their features. For years, I had tried to bridge the gap between their superficial expectations and my own desire for an authentic life. I had followed their rules, pursued a respected degree in finance, and secured a lucrative career auditing corporate accounts. As an auditor, I spent my days analyzing balance sheets and uncovering hidden liabilities. I knew the truth about my parents' finances. Their wealth was largely performative, sustained by massive mortgages and the assumption of future corporate bonuses. They were heavily leveraged, living paycheck to paycheck on a luxury scale. I thought my professional success would buy me the freedom to choose my own partner without their interference. I was wrong. In their eyes, my independence was irrelevant. I was merely an extension of their brand, and Harrison was a blemish they intended to scrub away. "He is not a fantasy, Mom," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself with its icy clarity. "He is the man I am going to marry. I am not asking for your permission. I am sharing my joy with you." My father's face hardened. The mask of the concerned parent vanished, replaced by the ruthless banker who liquidated assets that no longer served his bottom line. He sat back in his heavy leather chair, straightening his posture, and delivered the ultimatum that would redefine our family forever. "Joy does not sustain a legacy, Lauren," my father stated, his words cold and precise. "We have worked our entire lives to build the Vanguard Trust reputation and secure our standing in this community. If you choose to walk down the aisle with a man who spends his days covered in motor oil, you will do so without our blessing. And you will do so without our financial support. I will remove you from the family trust tomorrow morning. We will not fund this wedding, and we will not attend it. You will choose right now. Call off this ridiculous engagement and find someone in our tax bracket, or you can walk out of that front door and leave your inheritance behind." They sat there, waiting for the threat to take effect. They weaponized their wealth because it was the only leverage they understood. They assumed the prospect of losing access to the family trust fund would break my resolve. They believed my independence was a fragile, temporary rebellion that would shatter the moment they closed their checkbook. They looked at Brittany, who offered a sympathetic but ultimately empty shrug, siding with the bankroll. They looked at Trent, who smirked into his wine glass, secure in his position as the favored son-in-law. I did not need to think about my answer. The inheritance they dangled over my head felt like a heavy iron chain, and my father had just handed me the key to unlock it. I looked at Harrison. He gave me a single, reassuring nod. He was ready to follow my lead, whatever I chose. I stood up from the dining table. I carefully placed my linen napkin next to my untouched porcelain plate. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the steady ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. "Keep your money, Dad," I said, looking directly into his eyes. I never wanted it anyway. I want a partner who respects me, not a portfolio manager. I turned to my mother, who was staring at me with a mixture of shock and outrage. "And, Mom," I added, my voice dropping to a quiet, final register, "you do not have to worry about me embarrassing the family anymore. I am no longer part of it." Harrison stood up, buttoning his jacket. He did not say a single word to my parents. He simply placed a protective hand on the small of my back and guided me out of the dining room. We walked down the grand hallway, our footsteps echoing against the marble floors. We passed the expensive oil paintings and the curated displays of wealth that defined my childhood. I did not look back. I opened the heavy oak front door, and we stepped out into the crisp autumn night. The cold air hit my face, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and sudden freedom. Harrison unlocked the passenger door of his vintage truck for me. I climbed inside, the worn leather seat offering a deep comfort that my parents' mansion never could. As he started the engine, the low, steady rumble of the motor felt like a heartbeat. "Are you okay?" Harrison asked softly, shifting the truck into gear. "I am," I replied, and for the first time in my life, I truly meant it. But they are going to make good on that threat. They are not going to come to the wedding. Harrison navigated the truck down the long, winding driveway, leaving the imposing silhouette of my parents' estate behind us in the rearview mirror. He looked at the road ahead, his jaw set with a quiet, fierce determination. "Let them stay home," Harrison said, his voice carrying a heavy weight that I would only fully understand years later. "We are going to build a life so big, Lauren, that they will not even be able to see the top of it." I rested my head against the cold glass of the window, watching the streetlights blur past. My father had drawn a line in the sand, betting his entire relationship with his daughter on the assumption that money always won. He thought he was cutting off a rebellious child to protect his image. He did not realize he had just declared war on a man who possessed the resources to buy and sell his precious investment bank 10 times over. The battle lines were drawn, and the countdown to my wedding day had officially begun, setting the stage for a day of painful absence that would eventually fuel our quiet empire. The 6 months following that disastrous dinner were a masterclass in silent warfare. My parents did not call to check on me. They did not send a letter. They did not ask about venues or catering or floral arrangements. They simply erased me from their social calendar as if I had never existed. I planned my entire wedding without a mother to help me secure the clasp on my dress or a father to argue over the guest list. I navigated the bridal appointments alone, surrounded by other women who were flanked by tearful, supportive families. Every time a vendor asked about the reserved seating for the parents of the bride, a sharp, familiar ache bloomed in my chest. I told them to leave the front row empty. I kept hoping that the reality of their daughter getting married would pierce through their superficial pride. I kept hoping they would eventually realize that a family is more important than a country club reputation. That hope died on a crisp Saturday morning in late May. The skies over the historic stone chapel were a brilliant cloudless blue. The sanctuary was flooded with warm spring sunlight filtering through the intricate stained glass windows. From the confines of the bridal suite, tucked away near the vestibule, I could hear the low, joyful hum of the arriving guests. The contrast between the two sides of the aisle was a physical manifestation of my new reality. The right side of the church was packed shoulder to shoulder with Harrison's family and friends. They were warm, genuine people who drove sensible sedans and vintage trucks, laughing loudly and greeting each other with tight embraces. The left side of the aisle told a different story. My college roommates, my fellow corporate auditors, and a few loyal friends tried to spread out across the wooden pews to fill the glaring gaps. But the first two rows, cordoned off by thick velvet ropes and marked with elegant calligraphic reserved signs, remained entirely vacant. My stomach twisted into a tight, heavy knot every time my maid of honor peeked through the suite door to check the foyer. 30 minutes before the organist was scheduled to begin the processional march, I sat in front of a gilded vanity mirror. My dress was a sleek, minimalist silk gown that hugged my frame. My hair was pinned back, the veil cascading down my shoulders. I looked like a bride, but I felt like an orphan. My phone vibrated on the wooden vanity table. I reached for it, a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline rushing through my veins. A part of me thought it might be my father, calling from the parking lot, admitting that he could not miss the day his oldest daughter walked down the aisle. I unlocked the screen. It was not a text from my father. It was an Instagram notification. My sister Brittany had just uploaded a new photo. I tapped the alert and the image materialized on the bright screen. The breath left my lungs in a sharp, painful rush. It was a picture taken from the deck of a luxury rented yacht. The sparkling blue waters of the Hamptons stretched out behind them. My mother was reclining on a white leather sunbed, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and holding a crystal flute filled with a mimosa. My father stood next to her in a crisp linen shirt, a premium cigar resting between his fingers. Brittany and her arrogant fiancé Trent were in the center of the frame, smiling brightly for the camera. The caption beneath the photo read, "Sailing into the weekend with my favorite people to celebrate the only engagement that actually matters." They did not just skip my wedding. They orchestrated a lavish, public counter-celebration to ensure I knew exactly how little I meant to them. They wanted to punish me. They wanted me to stand in my white dress, surrounded by my new in-laws, and feel the crushing weight of their deliberate absence. My vision blurred as hot, stinging tears pooled in my eyes. I dropped the phone onto the vanity table, the screen still glowing with the image of their smiling faces. My hands began to shake. I pressed my palms against my collarbone, trying to force air into my seizing lungs. The humiliation was a physical pressure, a heavy stone crushing my chest. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a seat at their table, auditing my own personality to fit their rigid corporate mold. And this was my reward, an empty pew and a mocking photograph. The heavy wooden door of the bridal suite creaked open. The rustle of silk stopped as my bridesmaids turned toward the entrance. Tradition dictates that the groom must never see the bride before the ceremony, but Harrison never cared much for arbitrary rules. He stepped into the room, and the chaotic noise in my head instantly quieted. Harrison did not look like the grease monkey my parents claimed he was. He wore a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that draped flawlessly across his broad shoulders. He projected the quiet, undeniable authority of a man who commanded empires, even if my parents were too blind to see it. His dark eyes swept across the room, landing immediately on the tears tracing fresh paths down my cheeks. He did not ask what was wrong. He glanced at the glowing screen of my phone resting on the table. He processed the image of the yacht, the mimosas, and the cruel caption in a fraction of a second. He walked across the room, his leather shoes silent against the carpet. My bridesmaids quietly stepped back, giving us the space. Harrison knelt in front of my chair. He reached out, his rough, calloused thumbs gently wiping the tears from my jawline. The warmth of his hands anchored me, pulling me out of the spiral of rejection. "They are making the biggest mistake of their lives, Lauren," Harrison whispered, his voice a low, steady rumble that vibrated with fierce conviction. I let out a shaky breath, leaning into his touch. "They are not coming," I said, the reality finally solidifying in my mind. "They actually chose a boat ride over my wedding." Harrison looked directly into my eyes. The stoic calm he usually maintained shifted into something sharp and dangerous. A silent vow was being written in the space between us. "Let them have their boat," he said softly, his thumb tracing the line of my cheek. "I am going to give you the world. We are going to build an empire so vast and so undeniable that they will spend the rest of their lives watching us from the outside. You are not losing a family today. You are shedding a liability." He stood up, offering me his hand. I looked at his palm, feeling the texture of the hard work that had built his silent fortune. I placed my hand in his. The trembling stopped. The tears dried. The crushing weight of my parents' expectations dissolved, replaced by a sudden, fierce armor. I did not need a father to give me away. I belonged to myself, and I was choosing the man standing in front of me. "I will see you at the altar," Harrison promised, pressing a brief, firm kiss to my forehead before turning and exiting the suite. 10 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of the sanctuary swung open. The organist struck the first triumphant chord of the processional march. The congregation stood, turning toward the back of the church. I stood at the threshold alone. I gripped my floral bouquet, feeling the delicate stems press into my palms. I looked down the long carpeted aisle. I saw the empty velvet ropes on the left side, and for the first time, they did not look like a void. They looked like freedom. I took my first step forward. My silk dress glided across the floor. With every pace, I felt the phantom grip of my past loosening. I was walking away from the country club politics, the leveraged mortgages, and the conditional love. I kept my eyes locked on Harrison, waiting at the end of the aisle. We recited our vows with clear, unwavering voices. When he slid the gold band onto my finger, it felt like a seal locking away the toxic chapter of my youth. The reception that followed was a blur of genuine joy. We danced under string lights, cut a towering cake, and celebrated with people who actually wanted to be there. I did not check my phone again. I did not look at social media. I made a conscious, permanent decision to become a ghost to the people who shared my last name. That night marked the beginning of a 5-year strategic silence. I changed my phone number. I moved to a new neighborhood in the city. My parents skipped my birthdays, ignored my career promotions, and never once reached out to see if I was surviving the financial ruin they had predicted. They were too busy funding Brittany's lavish lifestyle and bragging to their social circle about Trent's high-risk hedge fund investments. They assumed I was struggling in a small suburban garage, regretting the day I defied them. They had no idea that Harrison and I were quietly building a dynasty. The mechanic shop they mocked was merely the ground floor research and development hub for his holding company, Apex Automotive. He was manufacturing custom, high-end performance parts for luxury vehicles across the globe. We were accumulating quiet, generational wealth while my father's precious investment bank, Vanguard Trust, was slowly rotting from the inside out. And as the economic tide began to turn, setting the stage for a catastrophic corporate collapse, the countdown to our inevitable reunion silently began. The collapse of Vanguard Trust did not happen overnight in a dramatic blaze of sudden bankruptcy. It was a slow, agonizing bleed, concealed for years behind the mahogany doors of their executive suites and the arrogant smiles of their senior vice presidents. They had overextended their reach into high-risk commercial real estate and ignored shifting market trends, relying on their historical prestige to carry them through quarters of dismal returns. By the spring of our 5th year of marriage, the whispers in the Chicago financial district had turned into a deafening roar. Vanguard Trust was hemorrhaging capital, and the regulatory agencies had issued a quiet but firm ultimatum. The board of directors had exactly 30 days to secure a substantial capital injection, or the institution would face federal liquidation. For my father, William, this news was not just a professional setback. It was an existential threat. His entire identity, his social standing, and his fragile ego were inextricably tied to his title at the bank. He was a man who required the deference of junior analysts and the envious glances of his country club peers to feel alive. Without his corporate throne, he was nothing but a hollow shell wearing an expensive suit. But the reality of his situation was far more precarious than a simple loss of prestige. Through my own network of industry contacts, I pieced together the desperate puzzle of my parents' private finances. My father had spent the last 5 years funding an illusion. He had taken out a heavy second mortgage on the sprawling Connecticut estate to pay for Brittany's extravagant lifestyle. He bankrolled her designer wardrobes, her luxury vacations to the Hamptons, and the upkeep of an image that demanded constant financial feeding. Worse still, he had funneled a significant portion of his own retirement savings into the boutique hedge fund managed by his favored son-in-law, Trent. Trent possessed the outward aesthetic of a financial prodigy, but he lacked the fundamental discipline required to navigate a volatile market. When the economic tide shifted, Trent's high-risk portfolios began taking heavy losses. The returns he had promised my father vanished, replaced by frantic excuses and requests for further investments to cover the margins. My father was trapped. He was relying entirely on his year-end corporate bonuses from Vanguard Trust just to pay the staggering interest on his accumulated debt. If the bank went under, the entire house of cards he had built would collapse, taking his precious social standing down with it. The panic within the Vanguard executive ranks reached a fever pitch. Vice presidents were quietly updating their resumes and making discreet calls to rival firms, desperate to jump ship before the hull breached. My father, however, was too old and too entrenched in the Vanguard culture to start over elsewhere. He needed the bank to survive. He spent his days locked in his office, sweating through his custom shirts, staring at grim projection models, and praying for a miracle. That miracle arrived in the form of a private equity firm known as Apex Holdings. The announcement sent shockwaves through the financial sector. Apex Holdings possessed a reputation for ruthless efficiency and deep, untraceable pockets. They specialized in acquiring distressed assets, carving out the bloated upper management, and restructuring the remaining foundation into highly profitable enterprises. The Vanguard Board of Directors, desperate to save their own equity, eagerly accepted the buyout terms. They signed away the legacy of the bank to avoid total ruin, opening the doors for the new ownership to step in and clean house. The arrival of Apex Holdings sparked a new, distinct terror in my father. A corporate acquisition meant audits, performance reviews, and the inevitable elimination of redundant executive roles. My father knew his department had underperformed for 6 consecutive quarters. He knew his salary was an unjustifiable drain on the new budget. His only chance of survival was to secure a personal audience with the mystery chief executive officer of Apex Holdings and convince the man that William was an indispensable asset to the firm's future. He became obsessed with uncovering the identity of his new boss. He utilized every contact in his Rolodex, calling favors from old golfing buddies and hiring private investigators to dig into the Apex corporate structure. But the holding company was a labyrinth of shell corporations and blind trusts designed specifically to shield its founder from public scrutiny. The CEO was a ghost, a faceless billionaire operating from the shadows of the Midwest. Left with no concrete information, my father fell back on the only strategy he understood. He decided to rely on his cultivated charm and his polished veneer of generational wealth. He believed that if he could just get into a room with the new owner, he could speak the secret language of the elite and secure his position. He went to his personal tailor and commissioned a new bespoke suit, spending money he no longer possessed to ensure he looked the part of a vital corporate pillar. He spent his evenings standing in front of the ornate mirror in his Connecticut mansion, rehearsing his pitch. He practiced the firm handshake, the confident smile, the practiced cadence of a man who belonged at the top of the food chain. He was dedicating every ounce of his energy to courting a phantom. entirely unaware that the ruthless tycoon holding his financial life in the palm of his hand was the exact same man he had banned from his dining room table 5 years prior. While my father was pacing his bedroom and practicing his groveling, Harrison was sitting across from me in the quiet sanctuary of our home office. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a desk lamp, illuminating the thick stacks of Vanguard Trust personnel files spread across the oak surface. Harrison wore a simple gray t-shirt, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, the calluses on his hands brushing against the crisp parchment of the corporate dossiers. He picked up a specific file folder, the heavy cardstock bearing the Vanguard emblem. He opened it, his dark eyes scanning the contents with clinical detachment. I watched him from my armchair, nursing a cup of tea, feeling a profound sense of surrealism wash over me. Harrison flipped a page, the sound sharp in the quiet room. He looked up, meeting my gaze. "Your father has authorized some very questionable expense reports over the last 3 years," Harrison noted, his voice a low, steady rumble. "He has been using corporate accounts to subsidize client dinners that coincide perfectly with your sister's birthday trips to Manhattan. His department metrics are the worst in the entire Eastern Division." I set my teacup down. "He is terrified, Harrison. The bank was his entire identity. He over-leveraged the house to keep Trent afloat. If he loses this job, he loses everything." Harrison closed the file, the definitive thud echoing against the wood. He rested his hands on the desk, the same hands my mother had declared unfit to provide for her daughter. He did not look vindictive. He did not harbor the chaotic, messy anger that demands screaming matches and theatrical confrontations. He possessed the quiet, terrifying patience of a man who lets his enemies dig their own graves. "He built a life on appearances, Lauren," Harrison said softly. "And now the bill has come due. I am not going to destroy him out of spite. I am simply going to apply the exact same standard of worth he applied to me. I am going to evaluate his actual value." Harrison stood up, pushing his chair back. He walked over to the window, looking out over the sprawling, quiet acreage of our own estate. We had built an undeniable fortress, brick by brick, while my family had spent their time polishing a crumbling facade. The irony was a heavy, palpable force in the room. My father had demanded I marry into his tax bracket to avoid embarrassment, and I had married a man who was about to buy his entire reality. "The Vanguard Board of Directors is hosting a merger gala next week at the Ritz-Carlton," Harrison said, turning back to face me. "A formal introduction between the old guard and the new ownership. They want to project stability to the shareholders." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick, black envelope embossed with silver foil. He walked across the office and handed it to me. "I think it is time we finally RSVP to a family gathering," Harrison said, a slow, dangerous smile touching the corners of his mouth. I looked down at the invitation. The elegant calligraphy requested the honor of our presence to celebrate the dawn of a new era. The stage was set, the players were assembling, and the 5-year silence was about to be shattered in front of the entire Chicago financial elite. The chauffeured town car glided to a smooth halt in front of the Ritz-Carlton. The Chicago night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and exhaust, but the atmosphere outside the hotel was electric. A steady stream of luxury sedans and sleek sports cars lined the valet curb. The Vanguard Trust Merger Gala was the undisputed social event of the season for the financial elite of the city. For the anxious executives and nervous board members, it was a high-stakes audition. They were arriving to impress the faceless private equity firm that had just purchased their sinking ship. For Harrison and me, it was something entirely different. It was a long overdue homecoming. The valet opened my door, offering a polite nod. I stepped onto the pavement, the hem of my floor-length emerald silk gown brushing against the concrete. Harrison emerged from the other side, stepping into the ambient glow of the hotel entrance. He wore a custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders with flawless precision. There was no grease under his fingernails. There was no trace of the blue-collar caricature my parents had constructed in their minds. He projected the quiet, undeniable gravity of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. He offered me his arm, and I took it, feeling the steady, reassuring warmth of his presence. We walked through the revolving brass doors and entered the grand lobby. The space was a breathtaking display of opulent architecture, featuring towering marble pillars and elaborate floral arrangements that perfumed the air with white roses and lilies. A string quartet played a soft classical melody in the corner, providing an elegant soundtrack to the palpable anxiety radiating from the guests. We checked our coats and moved toward the entrance of the main ballroom. The heavy mahogany double doors were pinned open, revealing a sprawling sea of crystal chandeliers and flowing champagne. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with hors d'oeuvres and premium cocktails. The room was packed with hundreds of bankers, brokers, and socialites, all wearing their finest tailored wool and designer silk. But beneath the expensive fabric and the practiced smiles, the desperation was thick enough to cut with a knife. You could hear it in the pitch of their laughter, which was a little too loud, and see it in the way they desperately exchanged business cards with anyone who looked even remotely connected to the new ownership. We stepped across the threshold, merging into the crowd. Harrison secured 2 glasses of aged bourbon from a passing tray, handing one to me. We did not rush to the center of the room. We lingered near the perimeter, observing the ecosystem of corporate survival playing out before us. I watched senior vice presidents sweating through their collars as they tried to corner board members. I watched junior analysts fetching drinks, desperate to prove their utility. It took exactly 3 minutes for my mother to locate us. Patricia possessed an eerie, highly tuned radar for anything she deemed out of place in her curated social circles. I saw her standing near a towering ice sculpture on the far side of the ballroom. She was wearing a heavy diamond necklace that I knew was heavily insured and likely leveraged against their shrinking home equity. She was holding a crystal flute of champagne, scanning the room for advantageous networking opportunities, when her gaze swept past the entrance. Her eyes locked onto mine. I watched the practiced, polite smile freeze on her face. The color drained from her cheeks, replaced rapidly by a flush of sheer, unadulterated indignation. She lowered her champagne flute, tapping my father sharply on the shoulder. William turned, his brow furrowing in confusion, before his eyes followed her line of sight. Brittany, standing a few feet away, noticed the shift in her parents' posture and turned her head as well. The physical reaction of my family was immediate and synchronized. They stiffened, their collective panic masking itself as outrage. They quickly set their drinks down on a nearby cocktail table and began moving through the crowded ballroom in a tight, aggressive formation. They navigated the sea of guests with measured strides, desperate to avoid causing a public scene. But their body language screamed of a localized crisis. They reached our corner of the ballroom, forming a rigid barricade between us and the rest of the party. Patricia stepped forward first, invading my personal space. The scent of her expensive floral perfume was overwhelming, triggering a brief, visceral memory of my stifling childhood. "What on earth are you doing here, Lauren?" my mother hissed. She kept her voice dropped to a harsh, venomous whisper, her eyes darting nervously left and right to ensure none of the senior Vanguard executives were watching our interaction. "This is an exclusive corporate event for Vanguard leadership and invited investors. You cannot just sneak into the Ritz-Carlton for free drinks." I took a slow sip of my bourbon, letting the smooth heat of the amber liquid coat my throat. I looked at the woman who had chosen a yacht party over my wedding day. 5 years ago, her harsh whisper would have sent a spike of pure anxiety straight through my chest. Now, looking at her strained face and the desperate fear swimming in her eyes, I felt nothing but a profound, detached calm. "We did not sneak in, Mom," I replied, my voice carrying a steady, effortless volume that made her flinch. We walked through the front door. Brittany flanked her left side, crossing her arms over her designer gown. She looked Harrison up and down, her lips curling into a familiar, condescending sneer. She was trying to project the authority of a wealthy hedge fund wife, but the dark circles under her eyes betrayed the stress of Trent's failing portfolios. "Did you rent that tuxedo, Harrison?" Brittany asked, her tone dripping with manufactured pity. "You are out of your depth. Look around." Trent is across the room right now trying to secure a vital account with the new Apex Holdings representatives. He needs this networking opportunity to save his firm. You two, standing here looking like lost tourists, is a severe liability for Dad and his reputation. She pointed a manicured finger toward the center of the room. I followed her gesture. Trent was indeed standing near the main bar, laughing aggressively at a joke told by a mid-level manager who possessed absolutely zero influence over the acquisition. Trent was schmoozing the wrong tier of the corporate ladder, wasting his breath on people who were just as terrified of losing their jobs as he was of losing his hedge fund. William leaned in closer, his face flushed. He smelled of strong scotch and pure, unadulterated panic. His bespoke suit looked sharp, but the man wearing it was crumbling under the weight of his impending financial ruin. "Security will throw you out the second they realize a mechanic bypassed the guest list," my father muttered, his jaw clenched tight. He glared at Harrison, treating him with the same dismissive contempt he had shown in our dining room half a decade ago. "I am fighting for my corporate life tonight. I am one meeting away from securing my position with the new CEO. I will not let you sabotage my career just because you wanted to play dress-up for the evening. Leave quietly through the side exit right now before I call the guards myself." He issued the command with the heavy, paternal authority he had always used to force my compliance. He expected me to lower my head, apologize for the inconvenience, and scurry out the back door to protect his fragile ego. He expected Harrison to shrink under the weight of his superior zip code. Harrison did not defend himself. He did not point out the intricate, hand-stitched details of his suit or the heavy luxury watch resting quietly against his wrist. He did not inform my father that the men guarding the doors worked directly for his private security firm. Harrison simply took a slow, deliberate sip of his bourbon. The ice clinked softly against the crystal glass, a crisp sound that cut through my father's hushed tirade. He looked at my family with profound, quiet amusement. The corners of his mouth twitched upward into a polite, chilling smile. "We would not dream of ruining your big night, William," Harrison said smoothly, his voice a low rumble that carried an undercurrent of lethal confidence. "I know exactly how important this merger is to your financial survival. Please, do not let us keep you from networking." My mother opened her mouth to deliver another venomous whisper, likely preparing to insult my dress or question my sanity, but the words died in her throat. A sharp, piercing whine echoed across the vast ballroom. The high-pitched feedback of a live microphone being switched on sliced through the ambient noise of clinking glasses and desperate conversation. The chatter in the room died instantly, replaced by a tense, expectant silence as hundreds of heads turned toward the main stage at the front of the hall. The time for hushed threats in the shadows had expired, and the spotlight was about to illuminate the truth they had spent 5 years running from. The high-pitched feedback of the live microphone acted as a sudden, sharp guillotine, severing the tense confrontation in our secluded corner of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. The shrill sound echoed off the marble pillars and the gilded ceiling, commanding the immediate attention of every single person in the room. The ambient hum of hundreds of overlapping conversations died in an instant. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes ceased. The string quartet in the corner abruptly stopped playing their classical arrangement, letting their bows rest against their instruments. My father snapped his head toward the front of the hall. The sheer panic that had been radiating from him just a moment prior was instantly replaced by a rigid, desperate obedience. The microphone was positioned on a raised mahogany stage, flanked by 2 towering floral displays and a backdrop bearing the Vanguard Trust corporate logo. Standing behind the podium was Charles Montgomery, the outgoing president of the bank. Charles was a man who had spent 3 decades cultivating an image of unshakable financial authority. But tonight, his shoulders carried a distinct slump. He looked like a captain preparing to formally hand over the keys to his sinking ship to the pirates who had just boarded it. William did not even look at me or Harrison as he issued his final, hushed command. "Keep your mouths shut and stay out of sight," my father muttered, his eyes locked onto the stage with a terrifying intensity. He reached up and adjusted the knot of his silk tie, his fingers trembling slightly. "The man who owns my future is about to walk out there." He took a step forward, distancing himself from us, wanting to ensure he was positioned perfectly within the sightline of the podium. He wanted the new chief executive officer to look out over the crowd and see a loyal, attentive senior vice president ready to serve the new regime. My mother stepped right up beside him, smoothing the fabric of her designer gown, her social radar pivoting away from the embarrassment of our presence and locking on to the prospect of impending wealth. Brittany mirrored their posture, craning her neck to look for her husband in the crowd, hoping Trent was positioned well enough to catch the eye of the new billionaire. I stood holding my glass of bourbon, watching the three of them perform their desperate corporate choreography. They were like moths drawn to a blinding, dangerous flame. They worshipped power, and they were preparing to bow to the altar without having any idea who was actually holding the match. Charles Montgomery cleared his throat, leaning close to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles began, his voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system, blanketing the silent ballroom. "I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. As you look around this magnificent room, you see the faces of the individuals who built Vanguard Trust into a cornerstone of the Chicago financial district. We have weathered countless storms together. We have navigated volatile markets and unpredictable economic headwinds." Charles paused, taking a slow sip of water from a glass resting on the podium shelf. The executives in the crowd held their collective breath. They knew the history lesson was merely a prelude to the executioner taking the stage. "However," Charles continued, his tone shifting into a practiced, diplomatic cadence, "the modern financial landscape requires evolution. It requires a level of aggressive innovation and structural efficiency that we can no longer ignore. Over the past few months, it became clear that Vanguard Trust needed a partner. We needed a visionary entity possessing the capital and the foresight to guide this institution into a new era of profitability." My father nodded along with the speech, offering a performative display of agreement, as if Charles could see his diligent approval from 50 feet away. Patricia stood rigid, her eyes wide, waiting for a name, a face, a target she could charm at the post-speech reception. "We found that partner in Apex Holdings," Charles announced, his voice rising in volume, attempting to inject a sense of triumphant energy into his surrender. "They stepped in when others hesitated. They saw the intrinsic value of our foundation, and they brought the resources necessary to rebuild it stronger than ever before." The private equity sector is known for its quiet operators, but tonight, the leadership of Apex Holdings has agreed to step out of the shadows and address the Vanguard family directly. The anticipation in the ballroom reached a suffocating peak. The men and women around us shifted nervously in their expensive shoes. This was the moment their professional fates would be sealed. They were about to meet the architect of their impending corporate restructuring. "Please raise your glasses," Charles commanded, extending his hand toward the side of the stage. "And join me in welcoming the visionary who made this acquisition possible, the majority shareholder and the new chief executive officer of Apex Holdings, Mr. Harrison Vance." The name rolled through the sound system, crisp and undeniable. The ballroom erupted into a thunderous wave of applause. The clapping was enthusiastic, driven by the sheer terror of hundreds of employees desperate to demonstrate their loyalty to the new owner. But in our small, isolated corner of the room, time seemed to fracture and grind to a devastating halt. My father did not clap. William froze. The polite, eager smile he had plastered across his face fractured. His brain, wired for decades to process market data and assess risk, suddenly encountered a variable it could not comprehend. He had spent weeks hiring private investigators, pulling favors, and obsessing over the identity of the ghost CEO. He had prepared pitches and purchased a bespoke suit to impress a titan of industry. The name Charles Montgomery had just spoken was the same name belonging to the man standing less than 3 feet to his right. Patricia stopped breathing. Her chest ceased its rise and fall. She turned her head in a slow, mechanical motion, her wide, terrified eyes shifting from the empty space on the stage back to the man holding a glass of bourbon next to her daughter. She stared at Harrison, her mind frantically trying to reconcile the image of the grease monkey she had banned from her dining room with the billionaire sovereign who had just purchased her husband's reality. Brittany let out a short, involuntary gasp. She looked at her parents, waiting for someone to explain the joke. She waited for my father to laugh, to dismiss the announcement as a bizarre coincidence of names. But William was not laughing. The color was draining from his face at an alarming rate, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. Harrison did not immediately move toward the stage. He allowed the applause to wash over the room, letting the agonizing silence settle over my family. He took one final, deliberate sip of his bourbon. He swallowed, the movement of his throat the only sign of life in our frozen circle. He lowered the crystal glass and turned toward me. The fierce, protective promise he had made in the bridal suite 5 years ago, the vow to build an empire so vast they would have to watch from the outside, had just been fulfilled in spectacular fashion. He handed the glass to me. Our fingers brushed, a quiet exchange of triumph bridging the space between us. Harrison turned his attention to my father. William was shaking. The subtle tremor started in his hands and quickly spread to his shoulders. He looked at the impeccably tailored Tom Ford tuxedo Harrison was wearing. He looked at the quiet, lethal confidence radiating from the man he had called a liability. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The mechanic had not just succeeded. The mechanic owned the bank. The mechanic owned the building. The mechanic owned him. Harrison offered my father a chilling, polite smile. It was the same expression a chess grandmaster gives an opponent right before calling checkmate. "Excuse me, William," Harrison said smoothly, his voice a low rumble that cut effortlessly through the fading applause. "I believe they are calling my name. We have some corporate restructuring to discuss." Harrison reached up and casually fastened the single button of his suit jacket. He did not wait for a response. He did not ask for permission to pass. He turned away from my paralyzed family and stepped into the dense crowd of Vanguard executives. The moment the surrounding guests recognized him as the man making his way toward the stage, the dynamic of the room shifted violently. The sea of wealthy bankers and desperate vice presidents parted for him. They stepped aside, lowering their heads in rapid, obsequious deference, creating a clear, unobstructed path toward the podium. My mother watched the very elite social circle she worshipped bow out of the way for the son-in-law she had discarded. Harrison ascended the short flight of mahogany stairs leading to the stage. Charles Montgomery stepped back, offering a respectful nod, and surrendered the microphone. Harrison stepped up to the podium, looking out over the sea of faces, his gaze sweeping across the crystal chandeliers and the terrified executives. Down on the floor, my father stood rooted to the marble tile. His breathing turned shallow and erratic. He was still holding his heavy crystal tumbler of expensive scotch. His fingers, slick with cold sweat, were losing their grip on the glass, setting the stage for a final, undeniable display of his broken pride. The heavy crystal tumbler slipped right through my father's trembling fingers. It plummeted toward the marble floor, a slow-motion descent that perfectly mirrored the sudden, catastrophic freefall of his entire reality. The glass hit the polished stone and shattered, sending sharp, glittering shards and a wave of expensive amber scotch splashing across the toes of his bespoke leather shoes. In any other context, the sound of breaking crystal in a quiet ballroom would have drawn immediate gasps and judgmental stares from the surrounding elite. But tonight, the shattering glass was entirely swallowed by the deafening wave of applause echoing through the Ritz-Carlton. No one turned to look at the senior vice president spilling his drink. Every single pair of eyes in that room, from the junior analysts to the panicked board members, remained locked onto the man standing at the podium. They were mesmerized by the quiet, lethal authority radiating from Harrison. My father stared at the stage, his face devoid of all color. He looked like a man who had just woken up to find himself standing on the tracks with a freight train bearing down on him, paralyzed by the blinding light of his own impending ruin. The arrogant patriarch who had demanded my obedience, the man who had threatened to strip away my inheritance if I did not marry into his preferred tax bracket, was now suffocating in his own tailored collar. Next to him, my mother actually swayed on her feet. The heavy, insured diamond necklace resting against her collarbone seemed to drag her downward. She reached out blindly, her manicured fingers digging into Brittany's arm just to keep herself upright. Patricia had spent her entire adult life navigating the treacherous waters of Chicago high society, using her husband's corporate title as a shield and a weapon. She had mocked the grease monkey. She had chosen to sip mimosas on a rented yacht rather than witness her eldest daughter marry a man she deemed financially worthless. Now, looking at that same man commanding the respect of every billionaire and power broker she worshipped, the sheer scale of her miscalculation broke her mind. Brittany did not even notice her mother's nails digging into her arm. My sister was frantically scanning the far side of the ballroom, her eyes wide with a new, distinct terror. She was looking for Trent. Trent relied on Vanguard trust capital to keep his boutique hedge fund afloat. He utilized my father's internal influence to secure high-yield client accounts, masking his own poor market performance behind the bank's prestigious reputation. With Harrison taking ownership of the bank, the protective wall surrounding Trent's failing portfolios evaporated. Apex Holdings would audit every vendor, every external fund, and every leveraged asset. Brittany realized in that exact moment that her designer lifestyle was not just in jeopardy, it was already dead. Up on the stage, Harrison raised a single hand. The gesture was minimal, effortless, yet it instantly silenced a room full of the most powerful financial operators in the Midwest. The applause died down, replaced by a tense, breathless anticipation. Harrison adjusted the microphone. He did not look at my family. He did not offer a smug grin or a theatrical wink in our direction. He operated with the surgical, uncompromising precision of a true apex predator. He looked out over the sea of anxious faces and began to dismantle their world. "Thank you, Charles, for the introduction," Harrison began, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that commanded absolute attention. "And thank you all for being here tonight. I know the arrival of a private equity firm often brings a certain level of apprehension. You are wondering what the future holds for Vanguard Trust. You are wondering about your departments, your portfolios, and your own positions within this new structure." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the front rows of the audience. "I believe in transparency," Harrison continued, his tone shifting from polite greeting to sharp corporate reality. "So let us speak plainly. Apex Holdings did not acquire Vanguard Trust because it is a thriving institution. We acquired it because it is a distressed asset, resting on a solid but severely neglected foundation. For the past decade, this bank has operated on legacy rather than innovation. You have coasted on your historical reputation, while your competitors adapted to the modern market." Every word he spoke was a meticulously crafted nail being driven directly into my father's professional coffin. William had built his entire career on that exact legacy. He was the embodiment of the bloated, entitled upper management Harrison was describing. "I have spent the last 3 weeks reviewing the internal audits of every division within this building," Harrison stated, his voice ringing with a cold, undeniable clarity. "And what I found was a culture of profound inefficiency. I found top-heavy management structures prioritizing personal expense accounts and country club networking over fiscal responsibility. I found senior vice presidents authorizing reckless commercial loans to pad their own quarterly bonuses while ignoring long-term risk metrics." A collective shudder ran through the executives standing near us. Men in expensive suits shifted their weight, suddenly hyper-aware of their own inflated salaries and questionable client dinners. My father closed his eyes, his breathing shallow and erratic. He knew Harrison had seen the files. He knew Harrison had read the expense reports detailing the lavish trips and the unauthorized perks William had used to maintain his fabricated lifestyle. That era of corporate entitlement ends tonight, Harrison declared, the finality in his voice leaving no room for negotiation. Apex Holdings operates on a very simple, uncompromising philosophy. We demand rigorous efficiency. We evaluate every employee, from the mailroom to the executive suite, based strictly on their tangible performance and their verifiable data. Your zip code does not matter to me. Your social standing does not matter to me. Your historical title is irrelevant. If you are producing exceptional results, you will be rewarded. If you are coasting on your pedigree while this company bleeds capital, you will be systematically removed. It was the ultimate, devastating reversal of my parents' twisted worldview. For 29 years, William and Patricia had judged the worth of every human being based entirely on their pedigree, their job title, and the brand of their shoes. They had banished Harrison from their home because he lacked the superficial markers of success they required. Now, the man they had discarded was standing on a stage implementing a ruthless meritocracy that stripped away their superficial armor and exposed their deep, fundamental incompetence. We are going to restructure this bank from the ground up, Harrison continued, employing the vocabulary of a mechanic tuning a high-performance engine. We are going to cut the dead weight. We are going to eliminate redundant management roles and streamline our operations. It will be a painful process for some, but it is a necessary evolution. Vanguard Trust will return to profitability, and it will do so under a banner of strict accountability. Harrison stepped back from the podium. He did not offer a reassuring smile. He delivered a mandate. The ballroom erupted once again. This time, the applause was frantic, a desperate standing ovation driven by hundreds of people terrified of being labeled as the dead weight Harrison had just promised to cut. The senior partners, the junior analysts, and the board members clapped until their hands ached, offering their blind loyalty to the new sovereign. I stood in the corner of the room, sipping my bourbon, watching the surreal spectacle unfold. I felt a profound, liberating detachment. I did not feel pity for the man sweating through his bespoke collar a few feet away. I did not feel sorrow for the mother trembling under the weight of her diamonds. They had engineered their own destruction through a lifetime of arrogance and cruelty. My father did not clap. His arms hung uselessly at his sides. He stared blindly ahead, watching his affluent peers, his golfing buddies, and his corporate rivals deliver a standing ovation to the man he had called a grease monkey. He was watching his own execution broadcast live, and the crowd was cheering for the executioner. As the applause began to wane and the string quartet tentatively resumed their classical music to signal the start of the networking reception, the crowd began to shift. Executives surged forward, hoping to catch a moment of Harrison's time as he stepped down from the stage. But Harrison did not mingle. He gave a brief nod to his private security detail stationed near the perimeter of the room. A tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a dark suit and a discreet earpiece detached himself from the shadows. He navigated through the lingering crowd with silent, predatory grace, moving directly toward our isolated corner. My mother shrank back as the security guard approached, her eyes darting toward the exits, but there was nowhere to run. The guard stopped directly in front of William. He did not raise his voice, but his tone carried the unbreakable authority of the new regime. "William," the guard said, offering a curt, professional nod, "Mr. Vance has requested your presence in the private boardroom down the hall. He would like to begin your performance review immediately. Please come with me." 10 minutes after the security detail issued the summons, the heavy oak doors of the executive boardroom swung open. The private chamber was a stark contrast to the opulent chaos of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. It was a sterile, soundproof space designed for high-stakes negotiations and corporate executions. The walls were paneled in dark cherry wood, devoid of artwork or distraction. A long mahogany table dominated the center of the room, polished to a mirror finish that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. Harrison and I sat at the head of the table. We did not sit side by side like a married couple attending a family dinner. We sat angled toward the entrance, presenting a united, impenetrable front. The security guard stepped aside, allowing my father to cross the threshold. The heavy doors clicked shut behind him, sealing the three of us in a profound, suffocating silence. William did not look like the arrogant senior vice president who had ordered me to abandon my fiancée. He did not look like the confident socialite who had stood in the ballroom 20 minutes earlier, adjusting his bespoke tie in anticipation of meeting a billionaire. He looked 10 years older. The rigid posture he had spent a lifetime cultivating was gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated slump. His tailored suit seemed to hang loosely on his shrinking frame. A sheen of cold sweat coated his forehead, catching the bright light of the room. He stood at the opposite end of the mahogany table, refusing to pull out a leather chair. He looked at Harrison, then at me, his eyes darting frantically as he tried to process the reality of his own daughter sitting beside his corporate executioner. When he finally opened his mouth, his voice was a thin, reedy rasp, stripped of all its usual booming authority. "Lauren," William started, attempting to inject a note of paternal warmth into the sterile room. "Harrison, I know exactly how this looks. I know the optics of the situation are complicated." "There is nothing complicated about the optics, William," Harrison interrupted. His voice was a low, steady rumble that offered zero quarter. "Take a seat." My father flinched at the command, but he obeyed. He sank into the high-backed leather chair, resting his trembling hands flat on the polished wood. He tried again, shifting his strategy from denial to desperate groveling. "5 years ago, we made a terrible error in judgment," my father stammered, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a chaotic rush. "It was a massive misunderstanding. Patricia and I were simply worried about Lauren. We wanted the best for her future. We did not understand the scale of your enterprise, Harrison. If we had known you possessed this kind of capital, we would have celebrated your union. We would have been sitting in the front row of that chapel. You must know that." I listened to the man who shared my DNA attempt to rewrite history to save his own skin. He was not apologizing for his cruelty. He was not apologizing for abandoning his eldest daughter on her wedding day. He was apologizing for miscalculating Harrison's net worth. He was sorry he had bet against the winning horse. The sheer transactional nature of his regret was staggering. "You did understand," I said quietly. My voice cut through his frantic rambling, cold and decisive. "You understood exactly who he was. He was a man who built his life with his own hands. You just did not value it because he did not wear the right designer label. You chose to drink champagne on an empty yacht rather than walk me down the aisle, Dad. Do not insult my intelligence by calling your arrogance a misunderstanding." William swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against his expensive collar. He abandoned the paternal angle entirely, recognizing it was a dead end. He pivoted to pure, unadulterated desperation. "Please," William begged, the word cracking in his throat. "Harrison, you are a pragmatic businessman. You understand leverage. If you terminate my employment tonight, I lose everything. I am dangerously close to defaulting on the Connecticut estate. The second mortgages are coming due in less than 30 days. Trent's hedge fund is taking heavy market losses, and I cannot cover the margins without my year-end corporate bonuses. I will lose the country club. I will lose my standing in the community. You cannot bankrupt your own father-in-law." Harrison did not blink. He reached into his sleek leather briefcase resting on the floor beside him and withdrew a thick, spiral-bound dossier. He tossed it onto the mahogany table. It slid across the polished surface, stopping directly in front of my father's trembling hands. The cover bore the Apex Holdings logo and William's name printed in bold black ink. "I am not firing you out of spite, William," Harrison stated, his tone clinically detached. "I do not weaponize my companies to settle personal grievances. I operate on verifiable data. Open the file." My father hesitated, his fingers shaking as he flipped open the heavy cardstock cover. He stared at the pages of dense spreadsheets, highlighted metrics, and internal bank communications. "I am firing you because your metrics are abysmal," Harrison continued, leaning forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. "You have coasted on your senior vice president title for a decade, while this bank hemorrhaged money under your direct supervision. Look at page 4. You authorized 3 high-risk commercial real estate loans in the last 18 months to developers who possessed 0 liquid collateral. You pushed those loans through the Risk Management Committee to secure your own origination bonuses, knowing full well the clients would default." William stared at the ink on the page. The undeniable mathematical proof of his own corporate fraud was staring right back at him. He could not charm his way out of a forensic audit. "Furthermore," Harrison added, his voice dropping into a lethal, surgical rhythm, "you subsidized your youngest daughter's luxury vacations using Vanguard corporate expense accounts, mislabeling the charges as client retention dinners. You spent 30 years polishing the hood of this bank while ignoring the engine. And the engine is destroyed. You are not a victim of a hostile takeover. You are the exact reason this institution required a buyout. You are a financial liability, and Apex Holdings does not retain liabilities." I watched my father deflate. The arrogant patriarch who had demanded I marry a trust fund broker was now weeping silently in a corporate boardroom, begging a former mechanic for mercy. The satisfaction I expected to feel was entirely absent. Instead, I felt a profound, heavy closure. The monster under the bed had been dragged into the harsh fluorescent light, and he was nothing more than a terrified, bankrupt man hiding in a tailored suit. "We are not leaving you destitute," Harrison said, pulling a single sheet of premium paper from his interior jacket pocket and placing it on the table next to the audit. "Despite your professional negligence, I am offering you an early, immediate retirement. This is a comprehensive severance package. It will cover the remaining balance on your primary mortgage. It will not cover your country club dues. It will not fund Brittany's lavish lifestyle or Trent's failing hedge fund. It is just enough capital to keep a roof over your head and keep you out of federal court for corporate embezzlement." William looked at the single sheet of paper. It was a financial lifeline, but it came with a heavy, inescapable anchor. "There are strict conditions," I added, speaking for the final time in that room. "You will sign a strict non-disclosure agreement tonight. You will resign your position effective immediately, citing unexpected health reasons. You will walk out of this hotel, you will collect your severance payout, and you will never attempt to contact me or my husband again. You do not call on holidays. You do not send letters. You do not show up at our gates. If you violate these terms in any capacity, the severance agreement is immediately revoked, and Vanguard Legal will file criminal charges regarding the fraudulent expense reports." My father looked at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He searched my face for any lingering trace of the obedient, eager-to-please daughter he used to control with his wallet. He found nothing but a polished, unyielding reflection of the independent woman I had become. He realized, in that quiet, sterile room, that he had traded his actual family for an illusion of wealth, and now the illusion was permanently shattered. He reached for the heavy gold pen resting in the center of the mahogany table. His hand shook fiercely as he pressed the nib to the thick paper, signing away his corporate career, his superficial pride, and his family in one jagged, desperate signature. The heavy gold pen slipped from my father's trembling fingers. It hit the polished mahogany table with a dull, hollow thud, rolling a few inches before coming to a rest against the thick severance agreement. The ink was still wet on the signature line, a jagged, uneven script that marked the formal surrender of his corporate identity. He did not say a single word. He did not look up to meet my eyes or offer a final, desperate plea to the billionaire sitting beside me. The man who had spent 3 decades projecting an aura of unshakable authority simply pushed his leather chair back and stood up. His bespoke suit, tailored to project dominance, now hung on his shrinking frame like a borrowed costume. He turned around and walked toward the heavy oak doors. The private security guard opened the exit for him, gesturing toward the quiet hallway leading away from the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. I watched the broad shoulders of my father slump forward as he crossed the threshold. The heavy doors clicked shut behind him, sealing the boardroom and severing the toxic tether that had bound me to his expectations for 29 years. Harrison reached across the table and closed the corporate dossier. The sharp slap of the cardstock cover echoing in the quiet room signaled the end of the war. He turned to me, his dark eyes reflecting a profound, grounding calm. He did not gloat. He did not celebrate the destruction of the man who had insulted him 5 years prior. He simply reached out and covered my hand with his own. The rough, callous texture of his palm felt like the safest place in the world. We did not return to the grand ballroom to mingle with the terrified executives. We had delivered our message, and the new era of Vanguard Trust was already in motion. We exited the boardroom through a private corridor, bypassing the gilded lobby and stepping directly out into the crisp Chicago night. The valet brought our town car around. I stood on the pavement for a moment, letting the cool autumn breeze wash over my face. The suffocating weight I had carried since childhood, the desperate, clawing need to earn my parents' conditional validation, evaporated into the city air. I inhaled the scent of rain and exhaust, feeling lighter than I had in a decade. The fallout over the next 6 months was swift and uncompromising. The morning after the merger gala, Vanguard Trust issued a brief, sterile press release announcing the immediate early retirement of William due to unexpected health concerns. In the ruthless ecosystem of the financial district, everyone understood the translation. My father had been purged. Without his senior vice president title, the carefully constructed illusion of his wealth began to crumble at an astonishing speed. The severance package Harrison provided was a strategic lifeline designed to prevent a public bankruptcy, but it did not sustain their opulent lifestyle. Deprived of his exorbitant year-end bonuses, my father could no longer cover the staggering interest on his leveraged debts. Within 60 days, the sprawling Connecticut estate was quietly listed on the real estate market. They were forced to downsize to a modest condominium in a far less prestigious zip code. The cascading financial ruin demanded further sacrifices. My parents had to sell their exclusive country club memberships, surrendering their primary stage for social posturing. The true tragedy for Patricia was not the loss of the square footage or the manicured lawns. It was the sudden, chilling silence of her social circle. The affluent friends she had cultivated, the women who had happily sipped mimosas on that rented yacht while I walked down the aisle alone, worshipped power and proximity to capital. The moment William lost his corner office, those women stopped returning Patricia's phone calls. Her invitations to charity galas and society luncheons ceased to arrive. She was exiled from the very world she had sacrificed her eldest daughter to impress. The corporate restructuring of Vanguard Trust did not spare the extended branches of the family tree. During his second week as chief executive officer, Harrison directed his risk management team to conduct a forensic audit of all external vendor accounts and third-party investments. Trent's boutique hedge fund was flagged immediately. The portfolio review revealed exactly what Harrison suspected. Trent was masking abysmal market performance behind aggressive leverage and relying on Vanguard's institutional capital to prop up his failing numbers. Harrison severed the relationship without hesitation. Vanguard Trust formally withdrew all capital from Trent's firm, issuing a standard notice of contract termination. The withdrawal of a major institutional backer sent a lethal signal to the rest of the financial community. Panic rippled through Trent's remaining client base, triggering a rapid, devastating bank run. Investors demanded their money back, exposing the fragile, over-leveraged reality of the hedge fund. Trent's firm collapsed before the end of the fiscal quarter. The arrogant broker who had smirked into his wine glass at my engagement dinner found himself facing intense scrutiny from federal regulatory agencies. The sudden evaporation of their income shattered the golden couple facade. Brittany lost the designer wardrobe budgets, the luxury car leases, and the seasonal Hamptons rentals. The sister, who had played the social climbing game with ruthless perfection, was suddenly forced to navigate life without a safety net, discovering that her charm held zero currency when the bank accounts ran dry. While their house of cards collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance, Harrison and I continued to build our reality. Apex Automotive expanded its manufacturing footprint, securing new contracts across the globe. Vanguard Trust, now operating under strict, data-driven metrics and uncompromising accountability, stabilized and returned to profitability. We did not flaunt our success in the faces of those who had doubted us. We did not need to. We lived quietly, surrounded by genuine friends and a chosen family who valued authenticity over zip codes. Sitting in our home office months later, watching Harrison review engineering schematics with the same calloused hands my mother had so deeply despised, I realized the ultimate truth about familial obligation. Blood simply provides a biological starting point. It does not entitle anyone to your future, your peace, or your dignity. My parents had demanded my obedience under the threat of financial ruin, assuming I lacked the strength to survive outside their gated community. They thought conditional love was a leash they could pull whenever I strayed from their rigid expectations. I learned that the most profound revenge does not require shouting matches, dramatic confrontations, or vindictive behavior. The best revenge is subtraction. It is the quiet, decisive act of removing yourself from a toxic equation and allowing those people to witness exactly who you became without their permission. We built an undeniable empire on a foundation of loyalty, mutual respect, and grueling hard work. They built an illusion on a foundation of arrogance, and it took nothing more than a single gust of reality to blow it all away. If you are listening to this right now and you recognize the painful dynamics of conditional love in your own life, I want you to know that walking away does not make you a bad daughter or a bad son. It makes you a survivor. You have the right to protect your peace and build your own table when the one you were given refuses to offer you a seat. Your worth is not dictated by the people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If my story gave you the courage to set a boundary or walk away from toxic relatives, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to walk away from family members to protect your own future? How did you find the strength to leave? Let me know, because I read every single one. Until next time, keep building your own empires, trust your own worth, and thank you for watching Sophia Told Stories. Although the agonizing sting of familial betrayal, especially when your own parents choose the superficial allure of high society optics and a rented yacht over witnessing you marry a man they incorrectly dismissed as financially unworthy simply because he built his wealth with calloused hands rather than corporate leverage, can initially feel like an insurmountable rejection that shatters your foundational understanding of unconditional love. The ultimate, vindicating lesson embedded in this devastating ordeal is that your inherent value is never dictated by the shallow, zip code-obsessed metrics of toxic relatives who view their children merely as social currency, proving with absolute, undeniable clarity that when you summon the immense courage to sever those suffocating ties and refuse to sacrifice your authentic happiness on the altar of their manufactured prestige, you do not just survive the agonizing fallout, but you actively reclaim your agency to build a quiet, unshakable empire alongside a partner who truly respects you, ultimately setting the stage for a spectacular, karmic reality check, where the very people who mockingly discarded you are forced to watch from the collapsing ruins of their own bankrupt, over-leveraged illusions, as you gracefully and powerfully command the exact corporate tables they once arrogantly banished you from. A deeply personal journey of profound resilience and poetic justice that I hope empowers you to fiercely protect your peace and unapologetically walk away from anyone who demands you shrink to fit their fragile egos. So, if this narrative of reclaiming your power resonated deeply with your own experiences of overcoming familial toxicity, Please remember to like this video, subscribe to our growing community, and share your own triumphant stories in the comments section below to help others find their inner voice. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in to Sophia Told Stories.